Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here, and I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Good to
Oh,
see you again.
pleased to have you, Robert. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi there, Arnie. We're having a beautiful, unbelievably mild winter in my particular part of the country in mid-Alberta.
Hmm.
That's it's unbelievable, actually. It's usually right straight through along, probably above freezing at
Mm.
most days, and
That's
very mild.
interesting. Interesting you say that, Wally, because the other side of the planet, and we are the other side of the planet. If we went through the very core of the Earth, we're basically the other side of the world. In Adelaide, South Australia, and our summer is mild. All right, we're not in winter,
Mm,
we're in summer. Our summer is mild. Today is 21, top of 21.
mm,
It was 15 degrees just an hour or so ago, and it felt like 12. I'm in short pants, but I'm not sure that's such a good thing. And this is summer. Now, at times, Adelaide can get to 42 or even as high as 47
yeah,
in extreme weather, 47 degrees. And here we
that's
are, 21, but currently 15, and it's nearly 10 o'clock in the morning. So our summer is mild. We've even had a spot of rain, light rain clouds coming over, not even a mil or hardly a millimetre or two of rain, but it's that type of weather. It's almost autumn, but it's not. This is the middle. This is the 15th of
yeah,
January. It's the middle of our summer. And so it gives you some idea that the summer, the weather patterns, if anything, the oscillations, the variability. And it's very important to consider these things because if you listen, if you listen to what's painted through the media, which is our actual topic for today in Notes from Around, if you listen to the picture painted by the media, you would expect that it is blisteringly hot or terribly cold or there are firestorms everywhere and all that sort of stuff, when in actual fact it's significantly sensationalized. Now I want to cut across to some websites and just give us a lead up into today's discussion. So our first website is the Australian League of Rights homepage, and on this you'll find three videos, but in particular the video on the right, Notes from Around, was what we produced in this forum last week. It's also in the form of a podcast, so if you just want to download the podcast, you can. And then as a consequence of that forum we held last week, On Target was written and produced, and On Target is our journal. It's a weekly journal, and it's essentially a summary of the things that are discussed and taking those things through to conclusion about it, attempting to interpret, disseminate the news and what it means, what it actually means in regard to the ramifications to you as an individual. We also have a recommended reading, Vaccination, a very good book by Judy Weilerman. Judy Weilerman, PhD, Western Australia, good woman working very hard at what she does. A local Adelaide doctor, Haemophilia Holocaust, talking about the problems with the blood bank. And then, of course, the works of Oliver Haydorn, Lives of Our Own, Social Credit Economics, The Economics of Social Credit and Catholic Social Teaching, Social Credit Philosophy. These are very good books if you want to study if you like, the in-depth perspective, the scientific perspective on social credit, Douglas social credit. And of course, to top it off, we've got Who Called the Cook a Bastard by Stanton Hicks. Stanton Hicks was an officer in the Australian Army who was responsible for improving the nutrition. Improving the Nutrition, Stanton Hicks. Very important book, that, and also a bit of light reading, if you like, and a bit of history. And then finally, a PDF. It's a electronic book, Inferno, and it's essentially about the firestorms going through Victoria and the history of firestorms, which of course Australia has had a history of firestorms going through ever since Australia was founded, because that's the nature of it. We do have fires, lightning strikes will attack the forests and then they'll get going. So, okay, that's the summary of where we were last week and how it actually, the process of information flows forward. But what I'd like to do is actually take us through our newspapers and show you instances of what the major papers are talking about. In this case, the Australian is the principal, if you like, national newspaper, a Murdoch press, owned and controlled by him and his empire, and it specifically talking about COVID, and of course this satirical illustration here in regard to the humbug of what's going on in America, impeaching Trump based on hatred, of course, but and this resentment and hatred is consistent across the political spectrum. But it's very important to recognise that there is now a complete intolerance of other points of view. In regard to politics, in regard to medicine, in regard to climate, whatever it is, there is a complete intolerance of any other point of view. Now, the Australian Financial Review, again, the same. You talk about politics and you'll see that the Australian Open is an interesting scenario. There's a complete lockdown in certain parts of the world. There is an embargo on new arrivals from overseas. There is a quarantine period to identify any carriers of anything. And the point of this is that the Australian Open has allowed an American player who has tested positive to COVID-19. They have allowed him through to go straight through to perform at the Open in front of a crowd. This is an inconsistent administration of a policy, and it just goes to show you the humbug of what's actually going on. This is essentially opinion writings and things like this, and I note here that Google is attempting to, or is stifling any consideration, any debate, any news, alternative news sources. And I went to an article just yesterday, and it was in regard to a reporter in Australia who was doing a search for other reporters about our items, and Google was sanitizing. It was actually censoring the results. It was censoring the results of where one reporter couldn't find out information about another reporter. Now, that in itself is a form of book burning. It's a form of book burning. We will not even let you find alternative sources of information. So you've got to really consider the ramifications of this. Politically, it's happening that you can't have any point of view other than, if you like, a liberal or a socialist or communist point of view. In medical sphere, you can't have any alternatives other than vaccinate this one or vaccinate that one. But what about the option of, hang on, I can stimulate my immune system without vaccination. I can actually keep healthy by having clean water, good sanitation, by being outdoors and exercising, by eating raw food as much as possible. You can do all sorts of things to manage your own health. But the discussion in regard to any sort of management of health is centred entirely around the monopoly of the drug industry. And that's where it's coming from. This whole thing is centred around the drug industry. And it's fascinating that even in China, I say in China, it's the same as in the West. China is crushing dissent, and so is the West. The West is crushing dissent. And this is Epoch Times, which I subscribe to, and I read them in interest. I actually have a printed version arrive every week. And then finally, the Gateway Pundit. It's identifying individuals who were at the Capitol in Washington at that demonstration. The Capitol, there were Antifa activists there, Black Lives Matter activists. And not only were they encouraged by the police, the security within the Capitol building, but these people have been identified, and the alternative media is making its business of identifying these people who were agents provocateurs, playing to a script. And then finally, this website here, I'll just refresh it because I lose the images if I don't. What this is this is the Australian health.gov.au. It shows you the statistics for COVID, the statistics. And this is an important statistic, that this is morbidity, fatalities, the deaths by age and group. If you look at the statistics for Australia, you'll see that if you're 70 years and older, then the probability of dying is probably similar to dying of COVID-19. People do die once they get old. That's what happens. And these statistics to me show nothing untoward whatsoever. And I think that in itself is quite important. And I also find this statistic important, and that is the number of people who have identified COVID and who are not in the intensive care unit are in the blue, and the intensive care unit are in the yellow. So it goes to show you that one person in Australia on the 14th of January 2021, one person in Australia is in intensive care. One person. All right, this whole policy is based on the fact that there's COVID, there's statistics, there's the media saying what it's saying. In Australia, one person is in intensive care. So where are we? Where are we with the news services? Where are we with news and information? This is such an inordinate, biased perspective. All our news services are COVID, COVID, COVID. All they're doing is giving us COVID. One person is in intensive care. It's painting pictures of Britain. It's painting pictures of America. And we went through the what was it called? The council officers, the court in America, that was actually looking at the rejigging of the description of those who had COVID. And we placed it onto our website, that video. It was about 45 minutes that I extracted from it. Collin County Commissioner's Court. Collin County Commissioner's Court. And you'll see it there. And it was where they redefined how they were going to assess the number of cases for COVID. And it was a multiplication factor of at least 16. So for every one person who had it, 16 were attributed to have had it through probability, and that's how the statistics were working. It was a complete and utter fabrication of what was actually going on.
Right.
It really, really is important to start placing these things in perspective. Now I see that you're ready to jump out of the gates, Wally. So I'm going to give you the floor and let you give us your thoughts, please.
Well, in my particular opinion, I think that the whole thing is just one colossal psyop. In other words, the media has learned from their experience, their long experience, that they can shift public opinion by mere repetition while excluding contrary information. And if they repeat it over and over sufficiently, it makes its impression upon many human minds who are not overly critical and who more or less absorb what they are given. And it's a very dangerous thing because it means that we can completely depart from reality. It is something that is a strategy that is used to achieve a particular, a particular objective, and it means that we're departing from an objective and honest approach to life. And it is people who just want to impose their particular concept of events and non-events in order to achieve their particular end. And their end has to be looked at. That end is, wherever you find it, it's always virtually centralization of power. And in the end, it moves toward a world administration, where a very powerful center is able to impose its policies upon the world in general. Very dangerous, very dishonest, and really quite a sad commentary on where the human race is being led.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's a really, really important observation. I'm just going to cut back to us. Just hang on a sec. I'm just bouncing. I'm just actually going to go to a document in a sec, and I'll bring it up for you. It's written by Ivor Benson, and it's called the what is it called? It's called the Opinion Makers. and I've managed to find a PDF scanned copy of it. And Ivor Benson was writing about South Africa and also Rhodesia at the time that they as nations were under attack. They were under attack for, if you like, to hand over those nations to communist powers, and both nations did capitulate. And the role that the media played in bringing about the destruction of those two nations is very, very important to read about and understand. And he's documented the bias of the media and how they deliberately fabricated news in order to sensationalise the situation, to the point where an investigation was conducted by, I think it was a lord, and he found that they were so far from the truth. And this was not just one media single reporter who happened to just receive some information second or third hand. These were the actual reporters who were on the spot, who could witness the event, and the event itself was in an area the size of the quarter of the size of a football pitch. It was a very, if you like, controllable, for as far as observation goes, area. And they were able to witness all of the events that went on in that area, and their reporting was so biased, it was a total fabrication. And it really, really is important. I'll place that onto our library so that you can actually download it and read it. But he goes after event after event after event. And that's what we're witnessing today, is exactly this same phenomena of where the media has got to a point where they are so unreliable as a news source, as an information source. And then it comes to the question is, well, what options do you have in order to make your own considerations? Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Yes, well, the power of the media is certainly frightening. And it's nothing new either, you know. They have seduced nations, the populations of nations, into going to war against each other, with the result being millions of deaths. And this is hardly a new phenomenon. It goes back centuries, I'm sure. Ever since newspapers came into being, they've been agents of propaganda and insertion of false information into the community. You know, most people just read the headline, and the headlines are so carefully constructed. You get into the article and you find sometimes that there's no connection at all with the headline. You'll often find the headline is a complete distortion and exaggeration of the information allegedly being contained in the body of the article. So these people who put these publications out understand very well the effect of their presentation and the way they arrange things. I read just the other day that in advertising, it's been calculated that if you can expose the prospective client to a message 14 times, you'll probably get the idea inserted into their consciousness. Now, of course, all individuals are different. Some are more resistant than others, but this is a scientific thing, this psychological manipulation. But we seem to assume that it hasn't been perfected and it's not being used in a systematic way on the population. But there's no doubt that having made the progress they have for so long, they're going to make use of a tool like this in order to control the public mind. And we've talked about Edward Bernays in the past, and how he is the inventor of the concept of propaganda in the 20th century. He's someone that everybody should look at in order to get an idea of how this operates. And we have science now. As you were saying, Arnie, science is becoming more and more specialized. So it gets into smaller areas of study and becomes disconnected from a more synthetic, holistic view, I guess. Not only that, it has become so corrupted by the influence of money that I think it was the editor, both editors, the editor of the British Medical Journal and the editor of Nature, which are two of the top medical journals in the world. And they both said recently that they reckon that 50% of the science that is being done in the medical field today is fraudulent. And yet we're told we have to get these vaccines. Isn't that astonishing? Is the vaccine part of the fraudulent part of the medical science these days? I would suggest it has to be, because they've come up with this vaccine in such a short time. It's just not credible that it is safe, or that they understand its effects, or whether it's even going to be effective against COVID. In fact, the latest news is that they say it probably won't be effective against preventing you getting COVID, but it will be effective in diminishing your symptoms. Well, if that's the case, we hardly need a vaccine. We can diminish the symptoms by other means. You know, the human body is so complex. Every time I think about it, I can't comprehend that all these different organs and systems are working together harmoniously to keep me alive and to keep me in relatively good health. And frankly, I would trust my immune system, which has been perfecting itself for thousands of years, over some jerry-built vaccine that they put out in a few months. I think that my immune system is a lot wiser than the people who are trying to impose this vaccine, which in fact is not even a vaccine. If you look at the technical definition of vaccine, we should really stop using that term. But in any case, it's not to be trusted. And I really doubt if the people who are promoting it are even going to take it themselves. They're all saying they are, and they're making a big show of getting up in front of the public and being injected, but you never know what they're being injected with. It might not be the substance that they've reserved for the population in general. And also there have been some dreadful reactions to these vaccines. They've got a 3%, I think, adverse reaction rate for the Moderna. I think it's Moderna. Anyway, that's significant. And yet, you know, the people have died. In the UK, if you die within 28 days of getting a positive COVID test, they rate you as being a COVID mortality. But if you die within a day or two of getting this vaccine, they're trying to say, oh no, it had no relationship to the vaccine. So you can see the hypocrisy in the whole thing.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that, Robert. That's that is really, really important to place things in perspective. I'm just going to once it gets ready, cut across to The Opinion Makers, which is the book I was referring to by Ivor Benson, and that whole book, which is nearly a couple of hundred pages, it's scanned in, and so that's available for that will be available through our website, through our library, PDF library. And it is important to build the case, build your thinking around, especially if you like the bias of the media in the news that I've just given you the news reports, and you'll see that there is no alternative to a vaccine. There is no alternative. There's no discussion about an alternative. And I think it's really important. It's just the other day I received emails about who is the, if you like, the chief executive officer or the general manager of the BBC. Who is it? He just happens to be a merchant banker, or was a merchant banker, head of the of major principal banks. And then you think, okay, well, who's in charge of the World Health Organization? And of course, you've got the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. You've also got the like of Bill and Melinda Gates, and you've got the, if you like, the medical and drug industry that are party to that. So that all of them have vested interests in it. Now, a phenomenon that happened 160 years ago, a bloke called John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller, I was reading up about him when he went to China, 1863 I think it was. He went to China in order to take kerosene across. And the kerosene, of course, was the slow-burning fuel that he was party to developing, if you like, or at least party to managing the development of it. And he was across there marketing kerosene for internal combustion engines. I think it's very important to remember that. One of the things that Rockefeller did, as far as I know, as far as I read, was one of the first things he did was establish a medical university. Now, Rockefeller was the father of monopoly. He was essentially developing the whole idea of controlling the oil and gas industries in the United States. And he went on to control as much as he could. He was a monopolist of the first degree. And here it was that he divested from just not oil and gas, but into chemical and industry, and then into the medical industry. And of course, if the likes of the drug companies can control the universities, there is only one narrative. There is only one story. And any alternative method of managing your health, other than from Big Pharma, is not discussed. That is bias. That is deliberate, if you like, bias towards a vested interest bias towards actually what's being taught. And I think you really need to consider, if you're going to consider vaccines, if you're going to consider politics, if you're going to consider economics or any other of the disciplines, you've got to consider vested interest bias. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, bias has a function. I mean, if you have information that is relevant to a given topic, you probably are going to be biased, at least for a while. But the thing of it is, you don't want a society where bias is static. You want a flexible, dynamic society where biases can be challenged, not only by oneself, people who hold them, but by those who might bring up alternative answers or views, because that's what makes an advancing, dynamic society. As soon as you have some people able to control a narrative, you become a static society. And when you become a static society, essentially you become a repressed society. And when that happens, genuine knowledge is not sought or found. It is simply that information that is beneficial to certain elements will be enforced upon the public, and that is a terribly dishonest and destructive influence on any given society or culture. It is the discovery of new things that adds to the general richness of a culture. And when some people get a monopoly, it gives them the power to control that narrative. Well, you're not moving toward the advancement of the society, you're just simply protecting the interests of the powerful, which is quite unacceptable by any civilized standards.
No worries. Thank you for that, Wally. That's right. It's how important it is to have diversity. You can still be a community, you can still be if you like, a culture, a nation, but to have diversity, to have differing points of view. And I think that's very, very important when Ivor Benson, writing in this book, Opinion Makers, he's talking about the vested interests, he's talking about media bias, and obviously they do have it. But the thing is, you can't claim to be unbiased, totally unbiased, because it's not true. There are vested interests. If you're in a drug company, you have a vested interest to market your drugs. If you're advertising a product, you have a vested interest to actually achieve market share and everything else that goes with it. These are bias. It's a natural bias. And if you are promoting freedom, you have a bias towards freedom, towards actually throwing off the oppression, throwing off the totalitarian, the one perspective fits all. I mean, China has one policy, really, emanating from a totalitarian down. Where is the diversity? At least in America, it's interesting what's going on with the Democrat-controlled lower house and their attempt to impeach Trump. Now, let Trump fight it. That will actually, if anything, that fight will demonstrate the vitality of the Constitution, and it'll demonstrate the vitality of the process, providing that he gets a reasonably fair hearing and that people can listen to alternative points of view. That's what any trial is about, that you can't just have witnesses and no cross-referencing, no actually cross-questioning the witness to see if they're actually telling what part of it is the truth and what part of it is bias or their perceptions and what is actual fact in that. Very important to place all these things in perspective. So to me, it's important. Okay, they're shutting down Trump. They're attempting to impeach him. He's capitulated. A fraudulent election, in my view. It was atrocious that the Supreme Court didn't actually do its job, do its function. But there are reasons for that, as I understand, and none of them are good. Most of them are sordid. It was quite horrific. I won't repeat them, but if they're true, they're horrific. And you realise that America is in a lot of strife. But so is Australia, so is Canada. The free world is in a lot of strife. I talked about in last week's On Target, I talked about the events of Tiananmen Square and how they were depicted for if you like, for the consumption of the Western population, to consider that there was some sort of coming down of the bamboo curtain. But in actual fact, what was going on was two events. What was going on inside Tiananmen Square with the tanks and the demonstrators and all that, all of those were members of the Communist Party. What was going on outside Tiananmen Square was actually a spontaneous gathering of people who thought that it was a real event in Tiananmen Square, and they were attempting to resist the tyranny of the communist regime, and they were summarily executed. Tanks were driven over them, the whole thing. It was a mass slaughter. But that was not reported in Tiananmen Square. That was not reported by the mainstream media. Only the one event was reported, not the two. And it took years to come out, the actual truth of the event of Tiananmen Square. So it is with Perestroika. Perestroika, the coming down of the Berlin Wall, the supposed transfer of power from Boris Yeltsin onto Vladimir Putin, Perestroika, Gorbachev, all those sorts of leaders, when in actual fact it was nothing of the sort. This was a completely controlled and staged event, and you will find Perestroika Deception in PDF in our library, and it's there for you to read. These events are, if you like, staged events for public consumption. In the Adelaide Advertiser this past week, with the events of the 6th of January in the Capitol building, Capitol Hill in Washington, the Adelaide Advertiser had a picture there where the building was lit up in lights. The Capitol building was lit up in lights, and the headline said something like, "Anarchy, anarchy in Washington, anarchy." That was the media sensationalized headline, "Anarchy in Washington." Now, my reading of the reports that have come out since that event was that the march was relatively peaceful, that the events that were inside the building were staged for public consumption, staged for photo opportunities, and three of the four people who died that day died of medical conditions, of heart attacks or strokes or things like that. So you've got to consider what is really the truth of the situation of what went on at Capitol Hill, Capitol building, on the 6th of January 2021 in Washington. What is the truth? If you read the Adelaide Advertiser, you thought it was blood on the streets, but it was nothing of the sort. It was nothing of the sort. It was a peaceful march, and the police and the security inside the building were complicit. They were actually goading people to come in and escorting them through the building, which is an entirely separate, different narrative completely, similar to the, if you like, orchestrated event of Tiananmen Square. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Arnie, that there are a lot of staged events in the world. And we, unfortunately, in the West have more or less assumed that our governments were not performing the same kinds of setups and entrapping people, but it's simply not true. I mean, if you look at the pretexts for starting all the wars of the 20th century, they were practically all staged, often reported inaccurately by the press, sometimes nothing happened at all, as with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, with no attack whatsoever. That was admitted after, but it was the excuse for making war on Vietnam. So the same thing's been seen in Canada. There was an incident in Victoria in British Columbia at the legislature, and these two absolute drug addicts, heroin addicts, they're barely able to function. And the RCMP got them to walk down to the legislature with something that was supposed to be a bomb, but it was an entrapment scheme. And the purpose of it was to get headlines in the press in order to create the impression that there was some terroristic threat going on in Canada. In fact, the judge who presided over the trial said, surely we have enough real terrorism in Canada that we don't have to have the RCMP entrapping people into phony plots in this way. So she was excoriating on the role of the RCMP in this thing. But that sort of thing just seems to be going on all the time. We are manipulated into believing in false narratives, and it's psychological warfare on us going on all the time. Now, you mentioned the Rockefellers. Well, and going into China, well, my understanding is that Mao Zedong was actually associated with Yale University. Now, I think it might have been an operation of Yale within China, but he was not just some fellow who emerged from the general population and led a revolution. He was in contact with Western institutions. The same thing with Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was educated in France, from what I understand. I think he was educated at the Sorbonne. Then he goes back to Vietnam and he organizes a communist revolution. So all these things are not presented to us in a realistic way because we don't hear about these associations. The Rockefellers, their involvement in China, David Rockefeller said at one point that the communist experiment in China was the greatest social experiment in human history. And he also characterized it as being successful. And this was just after the Cultural Revolution, which was the most practically astonishingly brutal phenomenon in human history. So these bankers have got their fingers in every pie. The Rockefellers, absolutely, in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, were involved in setting up the educational system, in establishing the approach to medicine, and laying down the economic principles, certainly laying down the corrupt and unrealistic financial principles that we've been struggling with for centuries and been unable to make work in a successful way. They were in politics. The Rockefellers who ran for office, at one point there was a possibility that a Rockefeller would become the president of the United States. Indeed, the Rockefellers, who are monopolistic capitalists, also financed a key theoretician for the libertarian movement. Ludwig von Mises lived on support from the Rockefellers for at least a number of years. So I don't know what interest they had in creating libertarianism as a counterpart to socialism, but it seems as if it's just an aspect of this game of dialectics that they use to control the population. And I suspect that Donald Trump and the Antifa and so on are another example of this dialectics, and probably controlled behind the scenes to manipulate the population and bring them into subjection. So this is where we go. I think at least Social Credit can be proud that it has never been financed by the Rockefellers. early in its life, it did have some support. That one of the richest families in Canada actually brought C.H. Douglas, the founder of social credit, over to Canada to make a presentation. But once they figured out the implications of his economic thinking, which would have involved largely the dissolution of their control over society, they dropped him like a hot potato. It took not long for them to figure out that social credit, being a system of decentralizing power to the individual, was incompatible with the interests of people who are trying to create monopolies in all areas. So that is the way things have stood, and we have to realize that appearances are not reality. The headlines aren't reality, and all these institutions that have been forged, that have been so influential in governing the development of society, are not as they have been represented either. They haven't arisen spontaneously. It's not organic development. It's planned development, and it's been planned by people who have vast financial resources.
No worries. Thank you for that, Robert. I'm going to I'm playing around with the screen at the moment. I'll cut across to here first. I wanted to actually touch on something because you have reported on Ludwig von Mises, and I made it my business to draw in some, if you like, libertarian books, foundational books on libertarianism and laissez-faire capitalism in order to get some idea of the thinking. And of course, once you start doing it, you recognise soon enough that the London School of Economics, as one of the principal training institutions for economists for the world, London School of Economics teaches both facets, both Marxism and libertarianism. And I was fortunate enough to have met a fellow who was a libertarian, and who was, if you like, supportive of laissez-faire, or at least directionally towards laissez-faire, unhindered capitalism, and have him on interviews, if you like, quite a few times. And he was an honest man, and he spoke as he saw it. And I thought, well, that's fair enough. I can't agree with his philosophy, but I can see where he's coming from and his thinking. He actually, in a sense, what he did was he trained me as to how his thinking is. And that to me was very important, because there came a point in our discussions where there was a fork in the road. Could we agree? And the answer was no, we could not. We could not agree, because I believe in the individual. I believe that the individual is, if you like, sacred, is creative, is unique, and should be given every opportunity to find expression in their own life. Whereas libertarianism or Marxism is about controlling people. It's actually about exploiting the situation for power, for personal aggrandizement at the expense of others. And it paints an entirely different picture on, if you like, a policy, the ramifications of policy. And that's why philosophy is really important. That's why it comes back, in my view, why it's inconsistent of our supposed Christian Prime Minister, and I don't see one Christian policy emanating from his lips at all. What he is involved in is totalitarianism and deceit, and I see him as of the same ilk as Vladimir Putin, who will go into a church for a photo opportunity, but in actual fact bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, which is the fundamental prayer. It is the principal prayer of Christians, to bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. How can you pray that and yet do exactly the opposite? Not bringing about God's kingdom, but bringing about totalitarianism, a slave state. You can't reconcile the conflict of those philosophies. They are diametrically opposed. Your thoughts, and believe it or not, closing comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Arnie. I think that it is in the nature of human beings that they have conscience. And conscience guides our behavior toward our fellow man or woman. And there is compassion. And there is a recognition that there's abundance which should be available not only to the ambitious amongst us, but to the society as a whole. And I think that that is where most of these other philosophies, differing from social credit, really take their departure. The communist approach is putting all the hands of putting the control of society and the economy in the hands of the state. The state is just an abstraction. Somebody has to control a state, and those who control it will control mankind. So it's not really social credit is a genuine challenge to centralized power, because we believe in giving people access to the actual sustenance that is available within the natural environment in a way that makes it possible for individuals to be more genuinely independent in their attitudes, their decisions, their beliefs, their policies, their approach to life. You get a genuine tendency toward differentiation. And whereas these other things tend to freeze policies. The libertarians may speak of liberty, but I don't think it means liberty for everybody. I think it means, to a large extent, liberty for the powerful. And they seem to me to be driven by a certain psychological euphoria or something which impresses me as an expression of power and a happiness in doing so, or a satisfaction in expressing power. In other words, the devil take the hindmost, and I don't think that's what it's all about. That is not the way nature really operates. I don't think, if you look at it carefully. In nature, things abound, and they abound to the benefit of the various populations that are to be found there. Now, there are certain brutalities in nature, yes, it's true. But I don't think that that is in the nature of reality, actually. And human beings are supposed to be created in a higher sense, in the image of God, as we say. Now, certainly Christianity indicates that if we seek the kingdom, all these other things will be given to us. And when all these other things are referred to, that is an extremely broad field. It's a great wealth of physical and psychological resources. So I think that, and again, social credit is for the decentralization of property or of wealth, and that means the decentralization of independence, independent power to act independently. Whereas most of these other things lead to well, look at what's happened over the last century with the tremendous advance of technology. Technology has brought an enormous expansion of the capacity to produce and the volume of wealth that can be made available to people, but it has actually, as we see now, led to the concentration of some say some 90% of the world's wealth in the hands of the few. Now that sounds more like a cancerous growth than a healthy organism to me, because it's killing itself. It's choking on its own power, its own concentration. That is not a healthy situation. And I think that Douglas prophesied that unless we were to become more informed about the nature of our activities and what their actual policy and ends are, that the future of mankind probably held some extremely unpleasant events. And here we are. We've got all this enormous production and capacity for wealth. And what have we done? We've concentrated on wealth, our wealth in the hands of a very few people. And we've created a situation which is no longer requiring labor to any of the extent that it used to do. And as a consequence, we've actually created a glut situation where we cannot distribute what we're producing because we can't provide enough work. And if we do provide work, it is usually increasingly of an artificial nature and a destructive nature because it doesn't really relate to the actual needs, wants, and desires of humanity. So we have a sort of working ourselves into a deep hole because we have too much. And that shows you that there is a very serious dysfunction at one part of the economy at least, and that is, social credit says, at the distributive end, the consumption end of the economy. We have been obsessed with scarcity, and we have been obsessed for that reason with production. Production has gone so far now that it is no longer a problem. It's a problem only insofar as the abundance that it can create. We have not learned how to distribute it, how to place at the consumption end. And so now we're allowing the state to get involved in many, many activities which do not belong to the state in any way at all. It's just an artificial situation. We're trying to arrange for the distribution of wealth through the state's interference in the affairs of mankind, when it could be done automatically and harmoniously as a part of the natural world.
Thank you.
So we've rather worked our way into a deep well that we don't seem to, because we don't appreciate the entitlement of everyone to participate in the abundance of the kingdom. And that has to do with pride, has to do with a lack of faith, it has to do with a denial of God, a denial of a source of sustenance and wealth that exists beyond humanity. Humanity seems to have this idea that we produce everything. Well, that's absurd, because we produce building upon a foundation of things that have developed for generations and generations. Yeah. Some people say, well, yes, but still it's all related to labor if you go back far enough. The thing of it is, labor creates more efficient ways of doing things if it's intelligent labor. And those intelligent ways of doing things compound and contribute to our further advancement and productivity. So it is quite deceptive and dishonest to say that labor, if you go back far enough, labor produces everything. It doesn't, because machines produce things which go entirely beyond labor. You go into a factory today, a modern automobile factory, and it's spewing things out in an incredible manner without labor, but labor taking really a very minor role in the process. So it's not just a compounding of labor effort, it's a compounding of efficiencies of production that we have discovered and utilized. And that is far greater than labor. And so therefore, if you have that kind of production, you have to have, by any rational means, you have to have a means of getting the product to where it is intended, and that's to the individual.
A totally different mindset, isn't it? It's a totally
It is
different way.
yeah.
Yeah, totally different way of thinking, of of looking at the earth and the vast resources that we have of the earth, and the opportunity to find equity, to find a method of distribution. And that was the key to Douglas's thinking in regard to the finance economics. His book he wrote 100 years ago, 1918 I think it was, Economic Democracy. And of course we have that in PDF on our web. It's not easy reading because Douglas was a brilliant man, and he wrote on the basis that there were certain things that he assumed you knew, but you actually have to work your way through his book as a student, studying, if you like, a manual. Work your way through each concept at a time until you grasp it. And I think, to me, that's a very important consideration in learning anything, is that, yes, you do need to hone in on something to learn it, but then in the end you've got to come back and put it in perspective. What does it mean? What does it mean, the fact that wages are the only form of income? What does it mean? You look at it, wages are the only form of income for 95% of people. And if wages become a less and less component of the cost, the total cost in prices, what does it mean? It means that you come back and you say, it means that people don't have enough money to buy what's actually being produced by the machines, by technology, by advanced control. They don't have enough money in the system, and that's the issue that Douglas saw 100 years ago. He was 100 years in front of his time, no different than, if you like, the brilliance of Nikola Tesla, that was able to project his thinking into an entirely new concept of the rotating magnetic field electric motor, which of course revolutionized industry. And this is what Douglas did in the area of finance economics. Now, taking that into account, it means that you've got to redo your thinking. You've actually got to go back and find, well, my thinking is flawed here, and I have to actually educate. I have to re-educate. And that is the function of this forum. That's what it's about. It's about placing methods of thinking and placing thoughts into your mind, and then you have to take that further. Go back and redo your thinking. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
Yeah, well, thinking of socialism and libertarianism, I remember many years ago, back in the 1970s, I read a book that came out of the London School of Economics. It was written by Friedrich Hayek. And in reading it, I thought he was one of the founders of libertarianism, although the London School of Economics was set up as an institution for furthering the installation of socialism in society. I think it actually served the purpose of instilling a kind of mental illness in society. Anyway, I was really impressed by this book. I thought, what a brilliant book. And then I had the same experience, Arnie, of meeting a libertarian. I had discussions with him and we agreed on so much. And then at some point, I just got the feeling that this was a kind of sick way of looking at the world, because it is absolutely competitive. There is no softness in it. There's no consideration for the other fellow in it. It's pure competition.
Darwinism.
And if you think about, pardon?
Darwinism.
Yeah, that's Darwinism. But Darwinism, also communism is Darwinism. You look at the Communist Party, it's got exactly the same spirit in it. But social credit is different in that it is a system that allows for the growth of love within society, the application of love within society. These other people don't. They're hard of heart. They're cruel to other people. They will do monstrous things to other people and just say, well, too bad for them. They're not capable of playing the game, so we just leave them in the dust. We don't care for them. Now, social credit is not socialistic, but it is loving, and it is a system that is designed to help people along in their lives without interfering in that, to give them the freedom to develop in the way that interests them. So it's a very different perspective, and something that people should look at, especially people who believe or would like to see the emergence of a Christian society. We've had a kind of representation of Christian society in the past, and imperfect. I suppose it would always be imperfect, but we've been prevented from going as far in that direction as we could because of the financial system that has such a dominant role in our society, and that has not been designed to facilitate the growth of the individual and the development of loving relationships among all the individuals within society. And
hang on, Wally. Hang on, Wally. Go on, jump in, Wally.
All right.
Say something, Wall. If you've got a comment to make, you can make it.
Yes, I think I would be inclined to say that social credit envisages society that has a soul, whereas these other things tend to be bloodless competition or condescending mercy.
Mechanistic. You're right.
Yeah.
They don't have souls. Yeah, they're jungles.
Yeah.
We want a society in which the governing principle is the rule of the jungle. You're making confessions in front of a party panel in the communist organization, or you're just doing whatever you can to advance yourself over top of other individuals. I mean, this is not a vision of society that can possibly appeal to someone with a Christian orientation. So social credit is the fulfillment, in a way, in economic terms, of the vision of Christianity. And you remember the central prayer of Christianity: "Give us this day our daily bread." That's the promise, and we should be finding a way to realize that without trampling on the lives of other people. And it's perfectly doable if we'll just rectify the defective financial system we have.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting forum, fellas. We're into 1 hour 3 minutes, so we've had a good day. We've had a good go at this, and it really is important. Audience, viewers, it's important to consider the likes of what Ivor Benson wrote about in his Opinion Makers, that opinions are formed through the mainstream media. They're actually giving you false choices. Now, in the case we discussed, Marxism and libertarianism, false choices, whereas in actual fact, the real choice is to have freedom of choice. That's the real choice, that you are free to choose one thing at a time. And choose or refuse. That's what freedom is about. And that's what social credit advocates. That's what Christianity advocates. And that's at the very core and the heart of the, if you like, notes from around. Thank you so much, panellists, Wally and Robert. I really enjoy the discussion, the talk. You go to places that I haven't even thought of, and you crystallise my own thoughts. So I really appreciate your input into everything that's going on. Thank you again.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thanks much.
We appreciate you too.
No worries. Cheers. All right. Catch you next week, ladies and gentlemen. Cheers then.